In just 9 minutes, uncover the most explosive revelations from Tucker Carlson's 2-hour conversation with Clayton Morris. From the USS Liberty cover-up to French First Lady Brigitte Macron's hidden past, the Ukraine war deception, and the dark agenda of Western elites, this interview exposes what the mainstream won't dare to tell you. Keep watching till the end. Here are 10 key takeaways from the podcast. Takeaway 1. The USS Liberty attack was a false flag. The USS Liberty was an American naval intelligence ship attacked by Israeli jets and torpedo boats in 1967. The attack killed 34 U.S. sailors and wounded 171 more. The podcast claims that this was not an accident, but a deliberate plan between Israel and the CIA to drag the United States into a war with Egypt. However, the plan failed because some of the sailors survived and later exposed what really happened. The discussion points out that U.S. rescue planes were ordered to stand down by President Lyndon Johnson himself, which suggests that high-ranking officials knew about the attack in advance. The ship was flying an enormous American flag, visible from the air, but Israeli pilots still bombed it repeatedly. Even when the crew jumped into the water to escape, the attackers continued shooting at them, a move that was meant to leave no survivors. For example, the conversation highlights how surviving sailors tried to share their story, but their testimonies were ignored by mainstream media and history books. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 2. Brigitte Macron's identity questioned. The podcast brings up a highly controversial claim that Brigitte Macron, the wife of French President Emmanuel Macron, may not be the person she claims to be. Some researchers and journalists in France have suggested that she was born a man and took on a different identity later in life. This theory, which has gained attention in certain media circles, is considered highly sensitive in France. It is claimed that Brigitte Macron played a key role in shaping Emmanuel Macron's political career. She was his teacher when he was just a teenager, and many find their unusual relationship suspicious. Some journalists believe that she has hidden parts of her past that could be politically damaging. For example, the conversation points out that in an official photo of Emmanuel Macron, a book about pedophilia is intentionally placed in the background, which some see as a hidden message. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 3. Europe is heading towards self-destruction. The discussion focuses on how Europe is declining due to poor leadership, mass immigration, and economic mismanagement. The European Union, which was supposed to bring prosperity, is now seen as a bureaucratic monster that takes power away from individual countries and imposes unpopular policies. European nations are being forced to accept open borders, which has led to crime waves and cultural tensions. Meanwhile, politicians are more concerned with helping Ukraine fight Russia rather than solving their own country's problems. The EU is also accused of making bad economic decisions, such as spending billions on Ukraine, while European citizens struggle with rising costs of living. For example, it is mentioned that Portugal had to send its only working tank to Ukraine because of EU pressure, even though many Portuguese citizens are against the war. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 4. The West is at war with Russia. The podcast argues that the war in Ukraine is not about defending democracy, as mainstream media claims. Instead, it is a direct war between the West and Russia, with Ukraine being used as a battlefield. The United States and NATO are supplying weapons, intelligence, and even military personnel, making it clear that this is not just a local conflict. It is suggested that the goal of the US and NATO is to weaken Russia so that it can no longer challenge Western dominance. This war is also a way for the military-industrial complex to make billions in profits. At the same time, Ukrainian men are being sent to die in huge numbers, while Western leaders show little concern for their lives. For example, the discussion points out that attacks inside Russia have been coordinated by American military personnel operating in Ukraine, proving that this is more than just a war between two neighboring countries. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 5. George Soros is pushing to destabilize Russia. George Soros, a billionaire known for influencing global politics, is accused of playing a key role in efforts to weaken and destabilize Russia. His Open Society Foundation has been involved in funding regime changes in several countries, and it is suggested that he wants to break Russia apart into smaller, weaker states. Soros has publicly stated that Russia and China are obstacles to his vision of a globalized world. His NGOs have been linked to efforts that undermine Russian leadership, promote protests, and encourage policies that weaken the country from within. This is seen as part of a larger plan to ensure Western dominance over global resources. For example, the discussion mentions that Soros has given large donations to NATO-affiliated groups and organizations that push for military actions against Russia. We're halfway through the video. Thank you for sticking with us this far. If you're enjoying it, please give us a thumbs up and share it in your WhatsApp groups. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to comment below. To see more videos like this, make sure to hit the subscribe button. Now let's continue with the video. Takeaway 6. False flags are a tool for manipulation. The conversation discusses how governments have a long history of using false flag operations to manipulate public opinion and justify wars. A false flag is when an attack is staged or allowed to happen so that it can be blamed on an enemy, creating an excuse for military action. Historical examples include the Gulf of Tonkin incident, which was used to justify the Vietnam War, and 9/11, which led to wars in the Middle East. The claim is that similar tactics are being used today, with recent reports of UFOs possibly being government-engineered psyops to create fear and justify military spending on drones. For example, it is suggested that the recent lights in the sky over the mid-Atlantic were actually U.S. military drones, and that the government wanted people to believe they were a foreign threat. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 7. NATO is not a defensive organization. The podcast challenges the idea that NATO exists only to protect its members. Instead, it is described as an offensive military alliance that has been involved in secret operations and interventions around the world. It is claimed that NATO has supported terrorist attacks in Europe under the name of Operation Gladio, where secret paramilitary groups carried out bombings to create fear and justify increased government control. The argument is that NATO is not about defending democracy, but about maintaining Western military dominance. For example, the Bologna massacre in Italy is cited as an instance where NATO-backed operatives carried out an attack that was blamed on far-right extremists. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 8. The U.S. is deeply involved in child trafficking. The discussion alleges that the U.S. government and certain NGOs are facilitating child trafficking at an industrial scale. The claim is that, under the cover of humanitarian aid, children from poor countries are being smuggled into the U.S. and placed in dangerous situations. It is pointed out that nearly 200,000 Guatemalan children have been trafficked into the U.S. in recent years. Yet authorities are doing little to stop it. The media is also accused of covering up the issue because it involves powerful people. For example, the discussion mentions that child trafficking networks often operate with the help of NGOs, which claim to be helping migrants but are actually part of the problem. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 9. Western elites protect pedophiles. The conversation claims that powerful elites in politics, business, and entertainment are protecting pedophiles. The argument is that there is an organized network that shields high-profile individuals from exposure, while whistleblowers are silenced. For example, it is mentioned that the Epstein case revealed many high-profile names, yet the investigation into his clients was quickly shut down, suggesting that some of the most powerful people in the world are involved. Now let's move to the last takeaway. Takeaway 10. The next war might be in space. After traditional wars, the next major conflict could be manufactured in space. The idea is that once Russia and China are dealt with, the global elite will create a new enemy, possibly an extraterrestrial threat, to justify further military expansion. For example, the conversation notes that the media has been pushing UFO stories more than ever, which could be a setup for future military spending on space-based weapons. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed watching this video, please leave a like below and share this video in your WhatsApp groups. You can also discuss about this video by commenting below. To get more such videos in your timeline, press the subscribe button below.